Our Plant Stories has been nominated as a finalist in the Independent Podcast Awards in a new category called Environment and Natural World. I'll let you know how we get on. Thanks to all those who are regular supporters of the podcast with their commitment to buying a monthly coffee. And to Anne, who also sent some caffeine my way this month, all of which goes towards paying for this podcast, the hosting platform and the editing programme. The link is in the show notes. And now, a plant story. Welcome to Our Plant Stories and an Offshoot episode. I love the way that one story can lead you to another, and that has certainly been true in the case of the monkey puzzle tree. In fact, it seems to be a tree that has gathered perhaps more than its fair share of stories.
My great-great-grandfather was always writing to the magazines of the day, saying how big the tree was. Basically, if you were writing a book about a monkey puzzle, the tree you wanted to illustrate the section was the Dropmore Monkey Puzzle tree that my great-great-grandfather was photographed standing beside.
David Gedye has been tracking a story involving a monkey puzzle tree and his great-great-grandfather for the past 68 years. He self-published a book and it's sold out. However, luckily for us, he is sharing his story in this Offshoot episode. So when did he first really notice a monkey puzzle tree?
That was when I was standing beside a tree with my mother outside a farmhouse on the Fnab Hills in Pitlochry in Scotland. And we were standing by a monkey puzzle tree. My interest in the tree made her tell me a story about my great-great-grandfather. And she told me that he had been the first person in the country to grow a monkey puzzle tree from seed, which he had allegedly done by carrying the seed round in a tin in his waistcoat pocket. Now, when you're 10 years old and your mum tells you a story like that, you are going to believe it hook, line and sinker. And never question it, never debate it, you just take it as absolute fact. So every time I saw a monkey puzzle tree after that, if I was in the company of somebody, it would naturally be precocious kid, my great-great-grandpa grew the very first, etc., etc. And time went by, and I wrote a letter to my grandmother who lived in Whitley Bay. Now, I used to visit my grandmother when I was doing my agricultural college work, and she never mentioned monkey puzzle trees to me. But the moment I wrote her a letter telling her I was doing botany, she wrote a nice letter back saying I must have inherited my botany interest from my great-great-grandfather. And she explained that he was a head gardener at a large estate called Dropmore. But what Granny did was drop a lot of other little bombshells. Because what Granny told me was that Queen Victoria used to visit Dropmore. And one day when my Queen was going round, my grandfather, being the respectable head gardener walking a little distance behind obviously, overheard her say, "Oh, I remember planting that." To which she coughed very politely and said, "Beg pardon, ma'am, but it was the tree over there you planted." To which he got an exceedingly steely look from the monarch. But I have looked at Queen Victoria's diaries, and she frequently mentions Dropmore, because of course Dropmore is near to Windsor, so the story has an essence to it. But my grandmother also told me that my great-grandfather was given a silver cup, engraved with 2 trees that he had been famous for growing. But the real bombshell my grandmother dropped me was that she had photos of the trees, with him standing beside it. And I'd never heard any of those elements in the story. I'm 20 years old, and my granny's giving me a bombshell piece of information. Fantastic. And prophetically, she said, just in case we don't meet again, call your Auntie Nita, here's where I've put the photographs, they're for you. And my inheritance consisted of 4 items. Consisted, as Granny had said, of a monkey puzzle tree, very spectacular monkey puzzle tree, with my great-great-grandfather standing beside it. There was a picture of a Douglas fir tree. Now, until I got that picture, I knew nothing of the Douglas fir tree at that particular point. There was a picture of the old boy himself. It had obviously been torn out of a magazine or something. Frustratingly, it talked about trees and things, but of course I only had his picture, I didn't have the article. And there was a picture of a monkey puzzle tree, clearly taken in the same location as the Douglas fir tree, very cultured, manicured area, but with a railing round it, so it was obviously a tree of some significance. Well, it's 1969 and I've left university and I've got my inheritance. And I've joined the Lord Rank Research Centre. So here's the coincidences. I stand by a monkey puzzle tree, my mummy tells me a story. I write to my granny and tell her I'm doing botany. She suddenly tells me, I've got all this stuff, I want you to have it. And I'm now moving to High Wycombe. And where is High Wycombe? It is 5 miles from Dropmore. Fate has firmly put his hand on my shoulder and told me, you are going to have to go looking for your great-great-grandfather's trees. Absolutely no question. So I'm a research boffin. And what do research boffins do? Well, they do research. So I worked with a very nice man called Derek Doling, who encouraged me to write to Kew, write to the RHS, and I got nice letters back, and Royal Botanic Gardens told me that yes, my photograph had been published in a gardening magazine of the day. They didn't know where the picture came from, and the RHS wrote and asked me for money. And as you can see, I sent them a nice sum of 8 shillings and 9 pence. But in return, they sent me the full article from that gardening magazine. And I could see that my photographs that I had inherited had been taken to illustrate the magazine, which was a story all about the Dropmore pinetum and the trees in it. And from that article I learnt all about the Douglas fir tree, which my great-great-grandfather had been given the seed by his boss, Lord Grenville, from the very first batch of seed to ever be sent back to the country by David Douglas, and had been told, grow trees from these. Now, I think that's just staggering. I mean, Victorian gardeners were just handed seed of trees they'd never seen or knew anything about, and told by their bosses, grow them. But he successfully did so. He successfully grew 3 Douglas fir trees. And the photograph was picture of one of the finest, with him standing beside it. The article didn't tell me an awful lot about the monkey puzzle tree, but it did obviously have my picture in there.
Just give me that picture of your grandfather with the monkey puzzle tree.
Yes.
And I will put it on the website, but just describe for me, how tall do you think that tree is?
Well, when it eventually died, it was 78 feet. It was probably, at that picture, 60 feet. Still had a few years of growth to go. Once they get going, monkey puzzles grow at typically a foot to 15 inches a year.
There's just this picture of this man wearing is he wearing a top hat?
Top hat? Well, he's head gardener to a very important fella.
And he looks absolutely minuscule next to a phenomenally enormous monkey puzzle tree, doesn't he?
Yes, but the real feature of that monkey puzzle tree, and the real feature that it caught everybody's eye, is look at the way it's held all its branches right down to the ground.
Yes.
50 years on from it being planted. And that was what really made the Dropmore tree so famous. It wasn't just that it was a big tree, it was the fact that it held all its canopy right from the ground right to the top. It wasn't an umbrella monkey puzzle tree, the way they eventually finish up.
Yes, yes.
It was a fully clothed monkey puzzle, pretty well for all of its life.
That's a wonderful picture to have. What a wonderful inheritance.
Marvellous. I love it. Love it. But the second thing that the Horticultural Society sent me was the obituary of my great-grandfather in, again, the Gardener's Chronicle magazine. So I now had the full article, because that was where my picture had come from. It had been torn out of the obituary. But I now had the full obituary. I had his full life story, which, of course, as I'm also a keen genealogist, amateur genealogist, was absolute manna to heaven, because here was one of my forebears' life story laid out by my forebear. What more could I ask for? And what I love is the start of the article. Philip Frost, whose death on May the 10th, it is our duty to chronicle, said the editor of the magazine. So clearly he was a gardener of some esteem, who, by his peers, was held extremely highly. So it was really extreme. It was well worth my little postal order to the Horticultural Society.
That was money well spent, wasn't it?
It was money. It was absolutely money well spent, Sally. Every penny of it was money well spent, because it set me off on a lifetime trail. So let me just explain to exactly where Dropmore is. Dropmore, as I said, is located beside Cliveden Estate. Many people know Cliveden, of course, infamous for the Profumo affair, and of course more recently for Meghan Markle staying there before she popped over to Windsor to marry Harry. It's by the River Thames, and it has an adjacent parish of Taplow just below it, because Taplow will come back into the equation a little later. But basically, the house, Dropmore House, was built by Lord and Lady Grenville. Lord Grenville built it for his bride, so that when they got married she had a nice country home to go to. And he built it on its site because it overlooked the Thames. He had to remove a little hillock. It overlooked the Thames across the river to his old school of Eton and to Windsor Castle, where his monarch lived, because Lord Grenville was one of our prime ministers. But then you knew that because you know your history and all your prime ministers, don't you, Sally?
Absolutely.
Thought you would do. So basically, he was clearly a very important man, and that's one of the reasons why Queen Victoria used to come onto the estate. So, it's 1970. I've got my inheritance. I've got my information about the trees. I've got my first motor car.
I love this. This is a picture of your first motor car.
My first motor car, my split windscreen Morris Minor with its holes in the floor and the rain coming up through, and all of the other joys, and held together by David's eyes upon to keep it on the road. Thank heavens we didn't have MOTs in those days. And I have my first motor car, and I'm going to drive over to Dropmore because I know where it is now, and I'm going to pop in and find somebody who can help me. Only when I got there, it had an exceedingly high fence all around the estate, impenetrable, and the gates were locked. And I couldn't get in. And that basically is how it was. Every time I popped round by Dropmore, gates were locked, couldn't get in. Could have climbed the wall.
You thought about it?
Thought about it, could have trespassed, but I couldn't see the point.
No, you needed someone who would actually lead you to the tree.
Spot on. I needed somebody who could tell me about the estate, could tell me what was going on. So time moved on. And I moved up here into where I live now, and it's the 7th of August 1983. And I go out and buy my Sunday Observer newspaper. And I open the paper, and there is an article about the Mardi Artogier, who is the owner of Dropmore Estate. I didn't know that until I bought that paper. There's a picture of the house, the first time I'd ever seen a picture of what Dropmore House looked like. And he is the ambassador to the United Arab Emirates and has declared that Dropmore is his embassy.
Just as well you didn't trespass.
Just as well I didn't trespass. I was fairly relieved I didn't trespass. So time continued and the years passed. 1983 rolled into 1993, into 2003. My jobs at work allowed me to occasionally pop in by Dropmore, but nothing changed. Well, it did actually. The self-set trees just got bigger and bigger and bigger. The estate got more and more overgrown. The rhododendrons got bigger and bigger and more rampant. And we came to the 9th of June 2007. And my son and now daughter-in-law had announced they were getting married. He lived in London, worked in London. And they had gone to a wedding fair and seen the wedding package of the Taplow Manor Hotel. And they liked the wedding package because it was near to Heathrow and that would be convenient for many people visiting, coming to the wedding. And they were going to hold the wedding there. So there I was on the 9th of June 2007 with my two sisters who'd come down from Scotland for the wedding. And we had a bit of time in our hands, and we were next door to Dropmore because Taplow and Dropmore are side by side. So another one of those total coincidences. I had no control over where my son was going to get married. They made the decision. So I said to my sisters, come on, got a few minutes, I'll take you round by Dropmore.
Can I just clarify, this is the morning of the wedding?
This is the morning of the wedding. I'll take you round by Dropmore, show you where our great-great-grand... Of course, we'll never get in, because I've never been able to get in since I first went there in 1970, 37 years previously. But I'll at least show you the gates. So as we drive round, a lorry comes out. And I go, hang on a minute. If a lorry can come out, a car can go in. So we turned down the drive that the lorry had come out of, came to a barrier. The man didn't want to let us through because...
You weren't a lorry?
Building work, and I wasn't a lorry, correct. But good news was a lorry came up behind us. So he was forced to lift the barrier. He said, you park over there and let the lorry through. So he lifted the barrier. And I've never had it happen before or again. My foot stuck on the accelerator. And for some reason, we shot down the drive into Dropmore. So there I was, sharing my first experience of going into Dropmore. with my sisters.
That is such a lovely story.
37 years after I'd first turned up at his gates. Now, we didn't have a lot of time in our hands. Obviously, we had a wedding to go to. So we looked at the house, all the work being done on it. We spotted a monkey puzzle tree, which was wonderful. We spotted a Douglas fir tree, which was wonderful. And we turned round to go and leave because we had a wedding to go to. So when I came home, I logged onto the internet, and the good old BBC, 2 months earlier, had put on their news page, "Abolitionists' house escapes ruin." And they had posted a page about work is underway to recreate Lord Grenville's house and park. And they talked about how the house had come close to destruction. And what I learnt was that the house had been occupied by squatters. The Mardi Artelgier had hardly ever lived there. He'd abandoned the property, which is why it was always locked and looked overgrown and everything else. Left it to its own fate. Others had moved in and taken over. A major fire in 1990 virtually destroyed the whole house. There was a second fire in 1997 that finished it off completely. And the whole place had been allowed to go basically to rack and ruin. But it had now been bought by a developer, and he was going to turn it into apartments, restore the house, return it into apartments. And the most important thing I learnt was that the local preservation society were invited to an open day to see the work. So there I was, 7 weeks after I'd first got into Dropmore, 26th of July 2007. I'm now an invited guest into the estate. The barrier is lifted to allow me in. So I get my first experience. And then there are other times that I can get back into the estate. But what I'm doing is I'm building up a research database. And I had learnt that English Heritage had a wonderful collection of photographs. And I acquired the photographs. And they showed the gardens around 1880 when Philip Frost was still head gardener, and showed just exactly what Dropmore had been like in its heyday when all of the gardens had been under his care and love and attention. So I had a marvellous collection of photos.
And a team of gardeners, presumably.
A substantial team of gardeners. I don't know how many, the records don't tell, but it would have been a substantial number of gardeners. Anyway, I built up my information. I'd got aerial photographs of the estate. I'd had a good chance to walk around the estate. I'd learnt that all of the rhododendrons and kalmias and azaleas had all been underplanted by my great-great-grandfather, and they do make a very spectacular show of colour around the pinetum when they're out in full flower. So I was really accumulating vast amounts of information. But there were other tours in. I had 2 or 3 other opportunities to go into open days at Dropmore to see the work that was going on. I was building up my contacts. And it got as far even as the first show apartment being available to start showing potential customers. 2008. And what happened in 2008? Well, of course, we had a credit crunch. And 2 very significant things happened in that era. The first was that the hotel at Cliveden went bankrupt. I mean, Cliveden is a National Trust property, but they leased the big house for a hotel. And the developer at Dropmore went bankrupt, and the gates once more got locked. Now, we'd all laughed when we'd had our first tour around the house, because the Bucks County Conservation Officer, when we'd asked him, why are you making the developer rebuild this house to the original 1795 plan, when it's then going to be converted into 25 apartments? Why can't they keep the facade looking like the old facade, but just build the inside to a modern structure? And he said, in case somebody wants to turn it back into a single residence in the future. To which we all laughed, because who was ever going to buy 25 leaseholders out? And oh, by the way, there was another 25 apartment carbuncle being built on the side as well. So there were going to be 50 leaseholders owning Dropmore Estate. So we just had a good laugh. But the credit crunch struck. The house closed. Now, my boss, Derek Doling, who'd been the man who'd encouraged me to write those letters in the first instance, lived in Slough. And I'd taken Derek to Dropmore as a little treat. And I thank you for all that help all those years ago. And in 2012, I got a letter from Derek saying, you might be interested in this, David. And he sent me a cutting from the Slough Express that says, estate has new owner. And Dropmore House had been bought by the Livingston brothers, rich property developers, who had gone over to Cliveden, and they'd bought the Cliveden Hotel out of bankruptcy, taken the business over there, and one of the brothers wanted a country estate, so he had bought Dropmore with the sole intention of converting it back into a single residence, which he, I believe, has subsequently done. So I waited a period of time, and I wrote to Richard and said, I'd really love to have a chance to really look round the grounds properly, because by now I had got an enormous amount of information that would mean any visit would be much more meaningful and I'd learn a lot more from it. Richard agreed that I could contact his landscape architect consultants, and we were invited, my wife and I, to go to Dropmore. Had a lovely day around there with them, and they gave us a wonderful document, the Historic Landscape Master Plan, which was a complete record of the estate and had a lot of information in it that I'd already learned, but a little bit of extra. But one of the documents I'd come across, one of the most important documents, was a thing called the Dropmore Pinetum. The Forestry Commission had sent a chap called Alan Mitchell, a very well-known arboriculturalist, into Dropmore to survey the arboretum. He'd done that in 1963, and he had done a wonderful map of the Pinetum in which he'd mapped out all the trees. He tracked an enormous amount of information about them. And so I now knew a lot about where there were monkey puzzles growing. I knew where Douglas firs trees were growing. And I had been, obviously, around the estate with the master plan. And I could put all this together. And I certainly knew then, from Alan's work, that the monkey puzzle had gone. The monkey puzzle died in 1903, this wonderful monkey puzzle. But I had a full record of it because my great-great-grandfather was always writing to the magazines of the day saying how big the tree was. And Alan Mitchell had abstracted all that information. So he had created a complete record of the growth of the tree from when it was planted in 1830 at 2'6".
That's extraordinary. So he's literally tracking it and publicising it and writing about it.
Tracking the tree, publicising girth, height, everything.
So it's famous?
Famous. It's the most documented monkey puzzle in the country. But of course I'm also gathering pictures. Now the one time I didn't visit Dropmore Open Day, a chap called John Rotherow turned up at the open day, and John opened the boot of his car and got a painting out of a monkey puzzle. He said he'd bought it in Cornwall in a junk shop for £18, and it was just labelled The Garden at Dropmore. And he, being a Bucks man and knowing of Dropmore, he bought it just out of pure curiosity. So he brought it along to Dropmore, but nobody understood what it was. It was just a painting of a monkey puzzle tree. But of course, I immediately knew what it was, because I knew it was the monkey puzzle tree my great-great-grandfather was standing beside. And I went to see John, because I wanted to go and see the picture, the painting in the flesh, so to speak. And he very kindly presented it to me, which is wonderful. It's one of them, I love it. I just love the painting. But I was going through and doing a lot of research, and I was building up a picture portfolio of this tree. The first published picture, there was the painting in 1850, which Lady Grenville had commissioned and hung in her house. The first time it appeared in a magazine was 1854. It then had another painting done of it in 1870, when it was used to illustrate various books on trees. Then it was photographed with my great-great-grandfather beside it for the article we've talked about. Then the Garden magazine produced a photograph of it. That's actually, it's a wonderful thing, the Garden magazine one, because it was a photograph that was hand-tinted coloured. So it's very authentic looking and really showed the tree in its true beauty. And then the famous nursery of Veitch of Exeter sent a photographer in to photograph it so they could illustrate their manual of the conifery on it in 1881. By 1884, Ravenscroft is producing a beautiful book on trees, so he sends another artist in to paint the tree to illustrate his piece on monkey puzzles. The Fortescues, who had inherited the property from the Grenvilles, have family photo albums that are held in the archives in Winchester, in the Hampshire archives, and I went down and looked at their photo albums, an abstracted picture of the tree taken around about 1890. And then finally, the final photograph is actually taken in the year that the tree is declared dead, 1903. And it's taken to illustrate Elvis and Henry's Trees of Great Britain book. Basically, if you were writing a book about a monkey puzzle, had a section on the monkey puzzle. The tree you wanted to illustrate the section was the Dropmore Monkey Puzzle tree that my great-great-grandfather was photographed standing beside. So not only did I have all of the information about how it had grown, I had a complete pictorial record as well.
Total archive of this tree.
Complete archive of this one monkey puzzle tree. And
when he says died, do we know why it died? Do they talk about that at all?
Oh, the gardening press was full of letters of controversy because the gardeners had just changed. A new head gardener had just come in, and the old head gardener accused him of being negligent and killing off his tree. And he accused the old head gardener of not leaving it in the best of nick. And in the end, a line had to be drawn under the argument of monkey puzzles don't necessarily live very long in England. They just die, okay? But yes, its loss was seriously mourned. Its loss in the gardening press, it came down in it was 1902, I think it is, when it was declared dead. 1902, it is the year that the Campanile in Venice Square fell down. Right, the famous bell tower in Venice, opposite the Doge's palace, collapsed into a pile of bricks at the same time that the Dropmore Monkey Puzzle was declared dead. The editor of the gardening magazine compared the two and described the death of the monkey puzzle in terms of the loss of a 400-year-old ancient campanile in Venice as being a tragedy of similar proportion to the tragedy of the loss of the Oricaria at Dropmore. That is how its death was mourned.
That is how that tree was famous.
That's how that tree was famous.
If you remember back at the start of David's story, he described inheriting 2 photographs of monkey puzzle trees. And remember, you can see both on the website, ourplantstories.com. One photograph features a tiny figure in a top hat, David's great-great-grandfather, head gardener Philip Frost, standing beside the most enormous, very famous Dropmore Monkey Puzzle. The other is a smaller monkey puzzle tree, surrounded by railings.
The last significant research document I got in 2019 was this book called The Coniferous Trees of Dropmore. And it was a complete record of all of the trees written by my great-great-grandfather. We think he wrote it about 1865. We think Lady Fortescue, who had taken over the house, said, "You know everything about the pinetum. Can you write it down so that we also know everything about the pinetum and it's not just in your head?" And he wrote this chronology of all the trees. And he described tree number 17 as being given to Lord Grenville by His Majesty King William IV from Kew Gardens and planted near the Douglas fir by the walk. And that description described perfectly my photograph. So I now knew I'd inherited a photograph of a monkey puzzle tree that had come from Kew, given by King William IV in 1830. So the tree had to be an original tree brought over by Menzies in 1795.
Which is the first time these monkey puzzle trees arrive
Correct.
in the UK.
Correct. The first monkey puzzle trees to arrive in the country, and one of them is there growing at Dropmore and photographed, and I've inherited the photograph. The only known photograph in the world of an original Archibald Menzies monkey puzzle tree. I no longer own that photograph, by the way. It is now in Kew's archives. Now, the other thing, as I say, that Dropmore was famous for was the Douglas fir. The seed had been sent to Lord Grenville in 1827 by the Royal Horticultural Society. It too has a record of photographs covering its lifestyle. But of course the real beauty was I now knew exactly where it was thanks to Alan Mitchell's map. My last visit to Dropmore was in 2016. I say it's now a private house. Richard Livingston's turned it into a private home. And because I knew exactly where the tree was, and I was with one of my sisters at the time, who had been there on that first visit to Dropmore in 2007, we were able to go up to the tree and stand there and be photographed by a Douglas fir tree that our great-great-grandfather had grown from seed, given to his boss in 1827.
So way back when you are 10 years old, you are told a story which has a grain of truth in it. He did carry the seeds probably around in a tin, and he did plant a tree. It's just that he didn't plant the monkey puzzle tree. He planted the Douglas fir tree.
Correct. So I'm now in a position to resolve my mixed-up family story. Philip Frost has grown, as you say, an original Douglas fir from seed, not a monkey puzzle, as I'd been told. He'd cared for one of the first monkey puzzles to arrive in the country. Hadn't grown it, he'd cared for it, the King's tree, the King William tree. So he'd handled and looked after and nurtured an Archibald Menzies monkey puzzle. And under his care, a monkey puzzle sourced from the Horticultural Society had become the most renowned monkey puzzle of the 19th century, the tree by which all other monkey puzzles in the country would be judged.
Thank you to David for sharing his story, his extraordinary story. You may recall I was very certain at the end of Andrea's plant story that I would never own a monkey puzzle tree. I do now have a monkey puzzle tree that David grew from a nut. It's only 3 years old. It's fine, it's in a pot. Our Plant Stories is an independent podcast, so you can support it by leaving a review on your podcast apps. As I've mentioned before, it's not just nice for podcasters to hear from listeners, but it helps the algorithm too, so it gets recommended to others. Or you can buy me a coffee from the website, and that coffee will help to pay the costs of making a podcast. There are some editing programs and podcast platforms. I pledge I will not spend your donation on plants. Our Plant Stories is presented and produced by me, Sally Flatman. Thank you for listening. If you want to show your support for this podcast via Buy Me a Coffee, then the link is in the show notes or on the website ourplantstories.com. I promise you, your virtual coffee will go towards the podcast, not plants.